So once people come to realize this, the whole field of cancer will begin to change, because we have defined the mechanism, the general mechanism on how cancer cells are getting their energy. And then once you target the two fuels that are driving the dysregulated growth, which is the glucose and the glutamine, you kill the tumor cells.
Welcome to the Baby Let's Talk podcast. In this episode, I sat down and talked with Thomas N. Seyfried, who is a professor of biology at Boston College and received his Ph.D. in Genetics and Biochemistry from the University of Illinois, Urbana, in 1976. He did his undergraduate work at the University of New England and holds a master's degree in genetics from Illinois State University. He was a postdoctoral fellow and assistant professor in the Neurology Department at the Yale University School of Medicine. He presently serves on several editorial boards, including those for Nutrition and Metabolism, Neurochemical Research, the Journal of Lipid Research, and ASN Neuro, where he is a senior editor. Dr. Seyfried has over 200 peer-reviewed publications and is author of the book Cancer as a Metabolic Disease on the origin, management, and prevention of cancer. His book was recently translated into Chinese and is now under contract for translation into Turkish. His full list of peer-reviewed publications can be found on PubMed, and you can find all of Dr. Seyfried's links in the show notes on this episode. Professor Seyfried's work is truly groundbreaking, and I have no doubt that you will find this conversation very interesting and deeply thought-provoking. So, on to the podcast. Enjoy the episode. Hi, Professor Seyfried, and thank you so much for coming on to my podcast. It's such an honor.
Oh, thank you very much, Ragnar. It's nice to be here.
So, to begin, could you just tell me, how do you personally define health?
Well, that's kind of a broad but very simple thing.
Yeah.
When you want to know about health, how do you feel?
You want to feel good, right?
I mean, you can always ask somebody, how do you feel today? I feel great. Okay, then you must be pretty healthy, right? Yeah, I feel pretty good. So I always say that because I work with a lot of physicians and things, and I mean, when you talk to your patients, you can know whether they're feeling good or not just by looking at them. What's their state of well-being? And generally, if it's not good, you got a lot of pain and you're not happy. It depends on what part of the body you're suffering with. But you know, in general, defining health is just what in some ways we call it metabolic homeostasis. That means all systems in your body are working at their intended level with no disruptions. So we look at the body as a machine. Every part of the machine working at its designed level will be associated with health. So if your knee is damaged, it will affect the whole body in one way or another. Inflammation and all these kinds of things. Internal organs and things can be all disrupted. The gut microbiome and all these things. But in general, I think that metabolic homeostasis is what we refer to as at least all systems go.
So, Thomas, could you introduce yourself? What do you do, and who are you?
Oh, well, I'm a professor here at Boston College. I'm in my office now at the university. I'm a professor of biology. I've been here for 40 years. I came in 1985. Before that, I was an assistant professor in the Department of Neurology at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut. So I teach here a number of courses. I've taught neurobiology. I've taught neurochemistry. I teach general biology, and I teach neurogenetics, and I am teaching cancer metabolism right now, cancer as a metabolic disease. So I have undergraduate and graduate students, and I work with a professional staff of senior scientists and MD PhDs and this kind. So we have a broad range of interactions with people.
Can you take us back to how did your journey lead you into the field of science and medicine?
Well, I have a degree in genetics from Illinois State University. I was always interested in genetics. And at that university, I got a master's degree in neurospora genetics, a bread mold, and we were looking at mutations induced by chemical carcinogens and different environments that would enhance or reduce mutations, pure oxygen environments or hypoxic environments. Published a paper on that in the mutation research, and then I went to the University of Illinois where I got my Ph.D. But I was doing more mouse genetics at that time, and I became interested in glycolipids, especially gangliosides. And I spent 40 years trying to figure out what these molecules do. We structurally characterize them. You might know them from certain neurological diseases like Tay-Sachs disease and Sonhoff disease and these kinds. But we were very interested in the role in development and evolution in the structure of gangliosides. But at the same time, when I was at Yale, we worked in an epilepsy clinic, and we were trying to look at glycolipids in the brains of epileptic mice and humans, and at the same time, I was looking at glycolipids in some tumor cells, and we had developed mouse models of tumors. So it was a kind of a overlapping different kinds of research, none of which had any, well, with the exception of epilepsy, would have a clinical application. And then we developed really good models of epilepsy, and one of my students said, why don't we try ketogenic diets on epilepsy? And Yale people thought that was a waste of time, so I really didn't get excited about it. They thought drugs were the way to go. And then when I got to Boston College, my student told me, we have to go and do ketogenic stuff. So we started doing that, and it turned out that it was very powerful in stopping epileptic seizures in mice. And we started the first ketogenic diet workshop for the American Epilepsy Society. So I was participated in that. But at the same time, we were studying vascularization in brain tumors. And then we realized that calorie restriction, water-only fasting, and this kind of stuff could block epileptic seizures as well as manage vascularization in the tumors. And eventually it became clear that these tumors, why would calorie restriction fasting stop cancer so dramatically? And then it linked us back to Otto Warburg, and then he had seen these observations many years ago, but he attributed this effect to a mitochondrial disturbance in cancer. And he said that if the mitochondria are disturbed, the cells would have to use a fermentation metabolism, which is an energy without oxygen. And he had accumulated massive evidence to support this. So when we started doing our calorie-restricted studies on cancer, we were seeing the same thing Warburg. We were able to link it to what Otto Warburg was saying. And then I read more and more of his papers, and it became very clear to me that he seemed to be correct. It was strange why his work was discounted. And we started to look more into that, like why this German scientist who was the most nominated for Nobel Prizes, a giant in the field of biochemistry, why he was so discounted. And I was seeing things that were exactly parallel to what he was seeing. And then I started to realize, what's going on. It became very, very complicated. Personality issues, Holocaust issues. There were things that were not linked directly to science that was in part responsible for the discounting of Otto Warburg after the Second World War. And I felt that was not those were not good reasons for why you should discount this guy. And then I realized that he and the field were making assumptions that were incorrect. So at first I didn't know why there was such a resistance to Warburg besides all the other things. But then he and the entire field were making mistakes in assuming that oxygen consumption was a good marker for production of energy, ATP, in tissues. And Warburg said that all the tumor tissue that he studied had lower oxygen consumption with higher production of lactic acid, a waste product of fermentation. Everybody in the world knows that cancer cells produce more fermentation waste product. But Warburg said that was due to inefficient oxidative phosphorylation. But then another group of scientists said, oh no, some cancer cells, even Warburg admitted, consume oxygen at the same rate as normal cells. So if Warburg is right, how do you account for the fact that all these tumor cells and normal cells are consuming oxygen at the same rate? That means Warburg may not be correct with his mitochondrial hypothesis. So we started to look into this more in detail, and Warburg was saying that 1 mole of oxygen consumed could produce 7 moles of ATP, and cancer cells were consuming less oxygen than normal cells, therefore their capability of producing ATP through oxygen was reduced. But then how do you explain the fact that some cancer cells are consuming oxygen similar to normal cells? That would suggest that there was something wrong with the mitochondria. But the field said, oh no, mitochondria are perfectly healthy. The cancer cells choose to use fermentation, which is absurd. A cell does not choose to do anything. The cell is producing lactic acid because its mitochondria are defective. Well, then how come they take in oxygen? So what we did is we did a big study just recently. We published this in the end of 2024, where we clearly showed that cancer cells, yes, do consume oxygen, but the oxygen consumed by a cancer cell is not used efficiently for ATP production, whereas the normal cells consume oxygen and use the oxygen efficiently for ATP production. So here's the great mystery, one of the mysteries solved, that everybody was making the mistake, Warburg himself. You cannot equate oxygen consumption in a cancer cell with a certain amount of ATP through oxidative phosphorylation. There's a disconnect. Cancer cells use some of that oxygen for radical reactive oxygen production, where the normal cell doesn't do that. So we solved that, but nobody wants to believe that, unfortunately, because they've spent hundreds and millions of dollars on an instrument called the Seahorse instrument that measures oxygen consumption over a very short period of time using all kinds of equations, not actually looking at ATP production directly. And we're looking at ATP production directly using a different kind of an oxygen consumption machine, the reservoir system. And it's inconsistent with 90% of what the world is seeing. And we know that once, and we do it over long-term days, not just a few hours, so we can actually see what's going on with these cells. The other thing that Warburg did not know was that he and the field were all assuming that cancer cells get energy only from the fermentation of lactic acid using glucose as a fuel. Yes, that's true. But everybody knew glutamine was the second fuel, but they all thought it was respired using normal respiration procedure. We have now discovered that the glutamine is fermented, producing succinic acid as a waste product. This is another major discovery that Warburg did not know about, and the scientific field refuses to accept. Yet we have published hard evidence to show that the cancer cell can get energy from two means of fermentation. One is using glucose, producing ATP in the cytoplasm, with lactic acid as a waste product. And the second is use the amino acid glutamine through the glutaminolysis pathway, which is in the mitochondria, which is called mitochondrial substrate level phosphorylation. So this is what confused the field and continues to confuse them. The cancer cell has a mitochondria, and it does take up oxygen, and it does produce ATP. But the ATP is not being produced through oxidative phosphorylation. It's being produced through substrate level phosphorylation, a fermentation mechanism inside the organelle that's supposed to generate energy through oxidative phosphorylation. So you can see how this would confuse everybody. Because they say, Warburg was wrong. Mitochondria are very healthy in cancer cells. They take in oxygen and they produce ATP just like normal cells. They take in oxygen. They're not using it for ATP production, and they're getting the ATP from glutamine fermentation inside the same organelle. So once people come to realize this, the whole field of cancer will begin to change, because we have defined the mechanism, the general mechanism on how cancer cells are getting their energy. And then once you target the two fuels that are driving the dysregulated growth, which is the glucose and the glutamine, you kill the tumor cells. And if you transition the body over to fatty acids and ketone bodies, that the normal cells can easily switch. Normal cells can switch from glucose to ketone bodies and fatty acids. The tumor cells cannot do this. So now the solution, let's put it this way, a non-toxic, effective approach to managing cancer becomes clear. You must simultaneously target the two fermentable fuels driving dysregulated cell growth while transitioning the body over to fuels that the tumor cell cannot use, but the normal cells can use. And you must do this strategically, because the glutamine that's driving the cancer cell, that same amino acid also is important for our immune system. And our immune system and guts use, the gut cells in our intestines use glutamine. So you have to be strategic in how you target glutamine. If you are too aggressive, you will harm the immune system in the gut. And if you don't target glutamine, you allow the tumor cells to grow. So you have to be able to choke the glucose production of the tumor cell, and at the same time strategically target the glutamine utilization of the tumor cell. And once you do this, then you begin to see dramatic shrinkage and death of the tumor, if done correctly. And this is the big paper that we just published in BMC Medicine, where we have, with many authors, MDs, nutritionists, dietitians, biochemists, we all work together to produce this document, which is a strategy for managing glioblastoma, major brain cancer, but can also be equally used for every other major cancer. Because what we have found is that all major cancers have the same problem. They all need glucose and glutamine through a fermentation mechanism, and none of them can effectively replace glucose and glutamine with fatty acids or ketone bodies. So all cancers are basically one common disease of energy metabolism. The gene mutations that everybody seems to be excited about are all downstream effects of the reactive oxygen species coming out of the damaged mitochondria. So for the last 70 years, the field has been chasing red herrings that are effects, not the cause, of the dysregulated cell growth. And as the result of that, we have allowed ourselves to have cancer become a major killer of people living in Western societies, with the death rate going up every year. So in the United States, we have over 618,000 people a year, which comes down to 1,700 a day, or 70 people per hour. And these poor folks are treated with therapies that do not target glucose and glutamine or transition the body over to nutritional ketosis. So they are damaged severely, and if they do survive the toxic treatments, they usually have all kinds of health issues, for surviving poisonous radiations and chemicals that were used to treat their cancer. So you have a lot of cancer survivors, but now they become patients for all kinds of other therapies that now try to fix the damage that was done by being poisoned and irradiated. And the immunotherapies that are making billions and billions of dollars are based on the gene theory of cancer, that cancer is a genetic disease. And we have clearly shown cancer is definitely not a genetic disease. We have done multiple experiments showing that. So why are you treating people with therapies that are not based on what the nature of the problem is? And as the result, we have this cancer epidemic that persists and gets worse because the field either does not want to know the truth, rejects the truth for a variety of reasons. And as a result, it's the patients that suffer. It's the people suffering immensely, whether you're in Iceland, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, the United States, Japan, China, Brazil. You can go through all the major countries. We're all poisoning and irradiating people to try to make them healthy, and it's not working for a large number of people. And cancer is eventually going to replace heart disease as the number one killer until they begin to realize that it's a mitochondrial metabolic disorder that can be managed with minimal toxicity quite effectively. And the resistance is unbelievable. People don't want to do it. They don't want to, the system, it's the system.
Yeah, exactly. So this is all very fascinating, and I have so many questions for you, but what initially led you then to question the genetic theory of cancer and start exploring it as a metabolic disease instead?
Well, it was Warburg's work, but then as a geneticist, I have a Ph.D. in genetics, and I was indoctrinated to think, I never questioned the fact that cancer was not a genetic disease. I taught and I told kids that, cancer, definitely a genetic disease. And then I said, when I started doing Warburg's work, repeating what Warburg had done, I said, wow, this really is powerful. How come nobody's doing this? And then I realized they said, cancer is a genetic disease. And I said, well, if it's a genetic disease, why are we not making any progress in managing cancer? So then I started to find I read the papers by Sonnenschein and Sato, Carlos Sonnenschein and Ana Sato from Tufts University. And they had published major papers showing that cancer could not be a genetic disease. And then I started looking at their work, and we found cancers that have no mutations. Some cancers have no mutations, yet they're growing out of control. How can you say cancer is a genetic disease when you have cancers that have no mutations? How do you explain that? And then leaders in the cancer field said, not all cancers have bad mutations. They only have, the bad mutations are called drivers, and the innocuous mutations are called passenger mutations. And then I said, wow, okay, maybe not all mutations are bad, but then there were some cancers that didn't have mutations at all, passenger, driver, or anything. And I always ask, when I went back and looked at those papers, and they were by leaders in the field, and I said, well, what do they say about cancers that have no mutations? And the answer was they said nothing. They ignored it.
Yeah.
I said, why would you ignore something that's not consistent with your dogmatic view? So they said, driver mutations are the bad ones. So then I went and looked, and now we have all this new information from a variety of labs around the world showing that normal tissues, like you, look at you, young and healthy. If I did a genetic screen on your colon or your breast or your liver, you'd find all kinds of driver mutations in there. You don't have cancer. And they're saying now we find that these driver mutations that were supposed to cause cancer are present in normal tissues that are not cancerous. How do you explain that? And the answer is, it's unbelievable. They don't know how to explain it. And they say the search for the real bad driver is not yet complete. But I said, what kind? We found all these bad drivers, and you still don't, you choose to continue to hunt for something that will never be found. It's just a denial. And then the nuclear mitochondria transfer experiments, which I dug up from the field, shows that when you take the nucleus of a tumor cell that's full of these driver mutations and put it in the cytoplasm of a normal cell, you get complete growth regulation. And if you take the nucleus from a normal cell and put it in the cytoplasm of a growth dysregulated cancer cell, you get dysregulated growth. Clearly saying that it's in the cytoplasm, clearly saying that it's the mitochondria that are calling the shots. It's a mitochondria metabolic disease, not a genetic disease. So the field is nuclear-centric, thinking that all the problems of cancer arise from within the nucleus, and therefore the abnormal nucleus produces abnormal growth and molecules on the surface of the tumor cell that should be targetable, and that all turns out to be mostly untrue. Every now and then you get a patient who really responds well to immunotherapy because all of the cells have a common signal that is targeted. But a lot of times those immunotherapies will destroy your kidneys and your liver, targeting things that are not only on the tumor cell but also on your normal kidney and liver. Therefore, you die from hyperprogressive disease. All of this is nonsense. All of this does not have to happen. In our world, we can take cancer patients, shrink the tumor down dramatically, making the rest of the body super healthy, and then, if necessary, we can come in with a small dose of chemo, radiation, or even an immunotherapy, but used in a very, very minor way as kind of a final procedure to possibly knock off any surviving tumor cells. We would never use those as an upfront treatment because they create more harm than good. But that comes only when you understand the biology and biochemistry of the disease you're working with. And unfortunately, the field has become locked into this dogmatic ideology, and it comes down not to the science, it's to the systems and the policies that are preventing advancements. Too many people are making too much money on cancer. It goes from the top to the bottom. The hospitals are generating tremendous revenue in treating cancer patients with all the drugs and the procedures. The pharmaceutical companies are making enormous amounts of money on failed drugs. The academic industry run by the National Cancer Institutes throughout the world are awarding grants to people hunting for the never-ending the mutation that's supposed to be the one causing all this problem. That will never happen. Mm-hmm. So everybody is making enormous amounts of money, careers, prestige on a failed system, and the evidence for that is that there is no progress in dropping the death rate significantly. The major progress that was made, it was the anti-smoking campaigns from the 1990s, causing, and this is their highlight film reel, that we've dropped cancer death rates by 33% since the because of the anti-smoking campaign. It wasn't because of any new drugs. It was because people changed their behavior. Yeah. And once they change their behavior with respect to diet and exercise, you're going to see those cancer death rates drop even more. It's extremely difficult to get cancer if your mitochondria remain healthy. And what we're doing in every society is we're abusing the hell out of our mitochondria, leading to not only cancer, but diabetes, hypertension, high blood pressure, obesity, neuropsychiatric problems, dementia. All of these diseases are linked in one way or another to mitochondrial dysfunction. So once you realize that, now we have the keys to controlling cancer and all these chronic diseases. And we're putting out papers and showing people how to do this. And then everybody's going to come at some point and say, it wasn't really as complicated as we thought. We were the ones, our own selves were putting ourselves into these situations. And the field made enormous amounts of money putting Band-Aids on a problem that was intrinsic to our mitochondrial dysfunction. And once we realize how to keep our mitochondria healthy, we're going to significantly reduce cancer deaths, risks, all these kinds of things. And we're working on a major paper as we speak bringing all this to the head and letting the world know that we have a very clear solution to this problem based on hard science, not just speculative speculation or guesswork. It's all based on science. So it'll change, because I don't think people want to be unhealthy, and I don't think people want to have cancer. I think they get all upset when they get the diagnosis they have cancer. And we can put a big control over this whole system. The problem is people don't want to read the science. They don't want to look at it. They don't want to hear about it. It's too disturbing. It's too disruptive to the status quo. You've made a career out of something that turns out to be on a bedrock of sand, and you don't want to hear about that. So it's human nature. It's just who we are as a species, what we've invested in, and we don't want to say we were wrong. So I mean, that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah. So if we go to the basics, like explaining the foundations of the metabolic theory of cancer, for our listeners who have or may not have heard of this idea that cancer is a metabolic disease, can you explain what that really means in quite simple terms?
Yeah, well, we published our biggest paper that just came out on the Warburg hypothesis and the emergence of the mitochondrial metabolic theory of cancer. Theories are a way to explain the facts of nature, and you have a theory that tries to explain a phenomenon, and you continue to collect data to better explain the phenomenon. What we have found is that the mitochondrial metabolic theory can explain the phenomenon better than can this somatic mutation genetic theory. But then what does that mean in terms of how you get cancer? How does it all start, and this kind of thing? It was called the oncogenic paradox. It was a statement made by Albert Szent-Györgyi from Hungary, who received a Nobel Prize for his work on vitamin C. But he was the one who identified this phenomenon of the oncogenic paradox. He said, there's so many things that seem to be linked to cancer, but we have never found the common pathophysiological connection between these provocative agents and dysregulated cell growth, which is cancer. He said, well, people smoke, they could get cancer. Intermittent hypoxia can cause cancer. Oncogenic viruses like papillomavirus, hepatitis C virus, we know that you can get cancer from these viral infections. Chronic inflammation. As people age, they seem to be more susceptible to cancer. And he was saying, you know what, we can't figure out what the common pathophysiological mechanism is for this paradox. Like almost anything can cause cancer, and yet we don't know the common linkage. And even in the book The Emperor of All Maladies by Sid Mukherjee, which was a best-selling book on New York Times, he even wrestled. What is the common pathophysiological mechanism? Why this woman gets breast cancer? She smoked. Another woman gets breast cancer. She never smoked. Some woman who has a BRCA1 mutation gets cancer. Another woman who has the BRCA mutation doesn't get cancer. How can you explain all this? Well, we've clearly explained it. All of these things are chronic disruptors of energy metabolism in the mitochondria. So mitochondria become damaged chronically by all of these different provocative things. So a woman might get breast cancer because she has an occlusion of a milk duct leading to a focal inflammatory site, and that inflammation damages the ability of the mitochondria in a particular cell in the inflammatory region to become inefficient, leading to a compensatory shift to a fermentation metabolism, which would then be necessary for that cell to survive. But because of that shift, the organelle that mitochondria regulate the quiescent differentiated state of a cell. And if the cell needs to divide, it's the mitochondria that controls the cell cycle. And if the cell is damaged too acutely, it is the mitochondria that elicits a programmed cell death mechanism to kill the cell. But if the mitochondria become chronically disrupted, the death signal doesn't take place because the switch to the fermentation makes the kill switch no longer working. So that cell bypasses a natural death. It should die, but it doesn't. And then once the organelle controlling the destiny of the cell loses control of the cell, so the cell falls back on an ancient pathway of fermentation that all cells used before oxygen came into the atmosphere 2.5 billion years ago. So these cancer cells are falling back on an ancient pathway of energy where there was no growth regulation, no growth control, because the mitochondria did not exist at that time. So that milk duct occlusion could lead to a dysregulated cell growth in that. Another woman may have a BRCA1 mutation, which also damages the ability of the mitochondria to produce energy. The BRCA1, it's a protein produced by a particular gene, but the way it causes cancer is disrupting mitochondrial function. So again, you could either have a milk duct occlusion, you could have obesity, systemic inflammation, you could have a germline mutation, you could be older. All of these things will elicit a chronic disruption of mitochondrial function, coupled to a transition to substrate level phosphorylation, which is fermentation, and dysregulated cell growth. And what's interesting is that if the mitochondria are damaged too acutely, the death signal turns on and the cell is dead, so you can never get a cancer cell from a dead cell. But that cancers bypass the death signal because they have shifted to an alternative energy, which is a fermentation. Now, what's interesting is that oncogenes, which you hear a lot about, they are facilitators of transitioning the cell from respiration to fermentation. So HIF1 alpha, which is an oncogene, opens the floodgates to bring in large amounts of glucose and glutamine into the cell to drive the fermentation mechanism. And if I put a new mitochondria into the cell, HIF1 alpha turns off. You don't need large amounts of glucose and glutamine because the cell is back to respiration again, which is highly efficient because you got a new it's like putting a new engine in a car. So you don't need to have a large amount of this fermentation fuel. And then if you damage, now here's the best example of this. As a physician, you should know that when a person has a heart attack, seizing of the heart, their body fills up with lactic acid very quickly and succinic acid very quickly. So if you look at the bloodstream of a person who's just had a heart attack, he's no longer breathing, but he's not dead unless he stops breathing for 5 to 7 minutes or however long. And what happens is the neurons can only switch to a fermentation metabolism for about 5 or 6 minutes, depending on what kind of shape you're in. And then your neurons die and you're dead because your brain is dead. But in that interim period, both the heart and the brain and other organs are immediately switching to a massive fermentation mechanism. And the waste products of that are lactic acid and succinic acid, which are the waste products of glucose and glutamine fermentation in the bloodstream. Now, when that heart starts beating again, you give cardiac excitement, what do they call it? Pump on the chest, blow it to the guy. All of a sudden, he starts breathing again, and the lactic acid and succinic acid disappear from the bloodstream because he's breathing and he doesn't need to use fermentation. Now, here's the difference. That's a heart attack, an acute disruption of oxidative phosphorylation leading to a short-term compensatory fermentation seen by the buildup of lactic acid and succinic acid in the bloodstream. The cancer cells are continuing to dump lactic acid and succinic acid even in the presence of 100% oxygen. What that says is that their mitochondria are permanently damaged. Their mitochondria are no longer capable of producing sufficient energy, and that's the reason why they continue to ferment. That's the difference between a heart attack, which is an acute utilization of fermentation, and when oxygen comes back, it disappears. But the cancer is a chronic disruption of oxidative phosphorylation, leading to a chronic production of lactic acid and succinic acid, which are the waste products of glucose and glutamine fermentation. So to kill cancer cells, you must take away their glucose and glutamine, and they will die. That's their kill switch. They can't switch to any other fuels. It's not that complicated. And let's put it this way. It's not as complicated a problem as people made it out to be in the first place. We have a clear strategy for doing this. We now know how to kill cancer cells without toxicity, and they can't switch to ketone bodies and fatty acids. So because they need oxygen and a good mitochondria to burn fatty acids and ketone bodies. And all major cancers accumulate fatty acids as lipid droplets in the cytoplasm, which is a marker telling us they can't respire. So they build the fatty acid. They're telling us exactly what's wrong with them. For decades they've been telling us what's been wrong with them. And we, as a superiorly educated species, ignored the information that the cancer cells have been telling us what to do to manage the disease, because we have thought that they were just a genetic disease, and therefore the signs that the tumor cells were telling us were ignored. This is how we... it's unbelievable.
Sorry, and I just find it so fascinating because of this with the lipid droplets. It's been thought that the cancer cells are accumulating fatty acids in lipid droplets in their cytoplasm because they need as like a fuel storage to produce energy, right? But that's not the case, isn't it?
No, because if they try to burn the fatty acids, they'll create reactive oxygen, a greater amount of ROS, which will kill the cell. So the cell is storing the fatty acid because it can't burn them, and if it tried to burn them, it would die. So it's a kind of a protective mechanism against death to store the fatty acids. So, and to prove that, what we do is we grow cells in the presence of, or absence of, glucose and glutamine, in the presence of these so-called fatty acids or ketone bodies, and they die. So they can't burn them. If you take, now people say, now what is very interesting though, is that if you have fatty acids in the presence of glucose and glutamine, the fatty acids can in fact force a greater fermentation mechanism. So as long as you have the two fermentable fuels there, fatty acids will make the fermentation fuels be better used. So and then people say, oh, look at if I give them fatty acids, the cancer grows even faster. Yeah, but you didn't take away the glucose and glutamine. Take away the glucose and glutamine, the cell will die. So the fatty acids are increasing fermentation of glucose and glutamine that are still there. You never took away the fermentable fuels to see whether fatty acids alone could drive the dysregulated cell growth, and the answer is they can't. And we tested all this. So clearly we know what we're talking about because we have the scientific evidence to support what I'm saying. We interrogate these tumor cells. Yeah. This is what we do. So we're the only ones who do this. I don't know why they all seem to be looking at gene signaling pathways or some downstream stuff. The easiest way to determine this is we take the cancer cells and we put them in saline, which is just salt solution. And, they go in there and they die. There's nothing for them to eat. So you take a stopwatch and see how many hours it takes for these cells to all croak, dead. And then you say, oh, wow, this is interesting. They're all dead. Why? Well, they got nothing to eat. There's no fuel. There's nothing. It's just salt water, right? And what are you going to live on, salt water? I mean, these cells have to have something to grow, right? They're not going to grow on air and water. Water and air ain't going to make them grow. Where are they going to get the energy to make new membranes? Where are they going to get the fuel for new membranes, new DNA, new proteins? There's nothing there but salt and water, and they die. Then we add stuff back one at a time and see what keeps them alive. And wow, you start throwing a little sugar in there, And all of a sudden they perk up and they start making lactic acid, but then they die because they don't have any protein to make, they don't have any nitrogen to make protein or nucleic acid. You need nitrogen. Where do you get your nitrogen from? Glutamine. Glutamine is a beautiful source of nitrogen. Well, there's a lot of amino acids that have nitrogen. Why don't, maybe the tumor cells can switch to these other amino acids. So we put all the different ones in there. And yes, there are some, like glutamate, they can do a little bit. But the problem is then you have a logistic issue, which is the supply of the material in the environment. If you have a cell that's very inefficient in utilization of energy, you have to make sure you have enough fuel in large quantities to replace the efficiency. So the issue, of course, in tumor microenvironment, there's very little other amino acids. Glutamine is the major amino acid in the bloodstream in our body. And all the other amino acids are there, but they're not in quantities that would be sufficient to drive a dysregulated cell growth for a very long period of time. So you'd use up any of those. And besides, all the other amino acids must invest energy to get energy. So it's kind of a cycle. You're investing energy to get energy, but the overall is you're not getting any more. Glutamine is, you don't have to invest any energy in glutamine, so it's pure gold for the cell. And it's given the nitrogen. So not only do you get energy through mitochondrial substrate level phosphorylation, but you also have the nitrogen that allows us to synthesize DNA and proteins. And the glucose carbons are good for fatty acids, and they're good for a large number of other metabolites needed for growth. So those two fuels provide everything that the cancer cell needs to rapidly grow. And, you know, people say, oh, yeah, well, how are they doing this? Are you sure they're not using oxidative phosphorylation? So I said, well, let's test that. So, you know as a physician that if people want to die quick, you drink cyanide. Take a solution of cyanide and Kool-Aid, and you drink the Kool-Aid with the cyanide, and you die. Why? Because cyanide blocks the cytochrome C part of the electron transport chain, completely stopping the ability of oxygen to drive respiration, and you die. And it's a kind of a permanent thing. Well, we take our cancer cells and we give them cyanide, and it doesn't do anything. They don't die from cyanide. Wow. Yeah, because they're fermenting. They don't need oxidative phosphorylation. And you can grow them in the absence of oxygen, they grow fine. So that's telling us they're not using oxidative phosphorylation. They've switched to a fermentation mechanism. Oh, well, what are they fermenting? Well, we interrogated them. They're fermenting glucose and glutamine. We tested everything else. There's the only things. Do you think it would work in people? Yeah, it really works well in people. When you to kill cancer cells without toxicity. Why is nobody doing this? Because they think it's a genetic disease. Yeah. they're chasing genes, and people are dying needlessly as the result of this misunderstanding of what the nature of the problem is. So when you take people and you target simultaneously glucose and glutamine while they're in nutritional ketosis, you have allowed that person to live longer, a progression-free improvement and overall survival improvement is greatly enhanced by just switching the fuels that the tumor cell needs for those that it can't use. So and it works really, really well. Well, why is nobody doing this? Well, they think it's a genetic disease. Therefore, this is what I'm telling. And if you go to most oncologists, eat whatever you want. Cancer, there's no cancer cells can use all kinds of fuels, not just glucose and glutamine. Oh yeah, I did the experiments. I tested that. Why don't you read what we published and see where did we make our mistake? I even have a cash reward. Please, somebody, we'll give you $100. And we told my doc, I'll give you $1,000. One of my Dr. Duraj he'll give you $1,000 if you can find any fuel that the tumor cell can use other than glutamine. Nobody's taking us up on this. Nobody's coming to us and saying, I have the evidence. And then when they say they have the evidence, we look and they say, no, you still have some glucose and glutamine in there. You got to get rid of the glucose and glutamine. And then he says, everything dies then. You can't study something. I said, that's the exact...
That's the point.
That's the point.
But how, Thomas, how does chronic disruption of energy production, particularly through impaired oxidative phosphorylation, lead to the dysregulated cell growth that you see in cancer?
Yeah, well, that's the great question, because people need to think about that on two levels. One level is through evolutionary biology, and the second level is the role of mitochondria in controlling the cyclins and the cell cycle. So it turns out that the mitochondria, like for example, when you have liver regeneration, you can take a lobe of someone's liver and take it off, and the liver regenerates really well, and it uses respiration. At first it ferments. They get lipid droplets. When you first damage the liver, you've disrupted vascularization, and you see a switch to a temporary fermentation with lipid droplets in the cytoplasm. And then as the mitochondria regain their control, the lipid droplets disappear, and the liver cells start to grow very rapidly. They can grow faster than a tumor cell, regenerating liver cells. But they're using respiration. Yes, they use glucose and glutamine, but it's at a much lower level than the tumor cell would use it. Like if I take a hepatoma from the liver, which is a liver cancer, it uses glucose and glutamine in large amounts, producing lactic acid and succinic acid, whereas the regenerating liver cells grow very rapidly, but they're not producing lactic acid or succinic acid, clearly telling us they're growing very rapidly by an oxidative phosphorylation mechanism, not a fermentation mechanism. So when the mitochondria become damaged in a cancer cell, they control calcium signaling in the cell. The mitochondria, through the proton motive gradient, it's now getting a little bit deeper into the science, have a way to regulate calcium signaling. Calcium is a very powerful signaling molecule in the cell, and the calcium fluxes control the cyclins that control the cell cycle. So when you lose calcium signaling fluxes, the cell will go into a default state of proliferation, and that's the default energy state of cells is proliferation, and the default state of all cells is proliferation. The default energy state is fermentation. So when you go back evolutionarily, like Albert Szent-Györgyi showed, during the alpha period of life on Earth, we had single-celled organisms that were living on our planet before oxygen came into the atmosphere. And these cells were in a constant state of fermentation, but there was no growth regulation. They would grow as long as they had fermentable fuels in the environment, and then they would die. Only when the fusion between archaeobacteria and another cell, this led to the formation of mitochondria and led to the metazoans, which are multicellular organisms. So cells could have a division of labor within the cell, leading to more and more sophistication, which is life as we know it today. But in the early beginnings of life, when no oxygen was available, cells were growing like crazy in a dysregulated way and would die as soon as the fermentable fuels in the environment were dissipated. And this is the same strategy we're using to manage cancer. Cancer cells are defaulted to a proliferative state because the organelle controlling the cell cycle is no longer capable of doing that, and they're falling back on a fermentation mechanism driven by glucose and glutamine. So clearly, once you pack in the knowledge of evolutionary biology with the role of the mitochondria in regulation of the differentiated state or regulated growth, not dysregulated growth, because the organelle controlling regulated growth is abnormal, which then leads to dysregulated growth and a fermentation mechanism. So we put all the parts of the puzzle together, and now we know how to manage cancer effectively based on our understanding of evolutionary biology and default states of metazoan cells. And to test the hypothesis, we have had preclinical studies. That's how we did all this. We did it in mouse models of cancer. then we tested it in humans, and we're seeing more and more humans, whether they have glioblastoma, advanced breast cancer, or whatever, living far longer because we're tapping into the weak spot of the whole cancer cell. We know what to do. Is it perfected? No, it's not perfected. Any more than when the Wright brothers first flew their plane. Now, within 100 years, you got jet planes. Once the field knows how to perfect the system, cancer will not be a feared disease. It'll be just some inconvenience that you have to deal with for a while until you can bring your body back into a state of metabolic homeostasis, which will kill the tumor cells without toxicity while the rest of your body gets healthy. Now, that's a personal choice. If people don't want to do that, then we're not stopping anybody from being super saturated with poisonous chemicals or radiation. If they want that, it'll always be available. And we're still not getting rid of that because we know that if we can shrink the tumor down to a small residual mass, it may be possible to cure that individual with radiation and chemo, but in a very different dosage and approach to this strategy, timing, dosage. So we will take all of what we have available and just reconfigure the treatment strategies and get much, much better outcome for patients. So that's and all the major cancers have the same problem. So it is the mitochondria that control the destiny of our cells and the destiny of our life. We die. If you live long enough, nobody lives forever. We have a termination in our life. That termination can come earlier or later, depending upon the state of your mitochondrial health. If your mitochondria are healthy, you generally live longer than if your mitochondria are unhealthy. And that comes down to the second law of thermodynamics, which is entropy, which is disorder. Just by living on the planet long enough, your mitochondria develop a lot of wear and tear. And ultimately, we die from old age, from systems failure. It's kind of like all of the mitochondria just at the same time give up. You just can't maintain. You can no longer fight equilibrium. Equilibrium is death. When you no longer can keep the energy needed to transport ions on either side of the membrane, and that's another thing. We're alive because we are away from entropy. Entropy is where the concentration of ions are equal on both sides of the membrane, and we stay alive. We stay alive because of pumps, these membrane pumps that require a lot of energy. So the energy pumps push sodium out of the cell, potassium into the cell, and you have an electric gradient across the membrane of cells in our body, whether it's a neuron, liver cell, colon cell, breast cell, whatever. When those pumps run out of energy, you get systems failure, and you die because you run out of energy. And why some people run out of energy earlier than others? Well, their mitochondria are not as strong as other people. And some people die from cancer, you die from heart disease, you die from all these different kinds of things. But you have 100-year-old people, and these guys, they're alive one day and dead the next, because they've had an entropic systems failure because they just ran out of energy. Can't live forever. But their quality of life was pretty good up until the day they die. Even the Queen of England, she was shaking hands with some person one day, and the next day she's dead. Like, what happened? Well, she was older, and she just ran out of energy, which is what happens. But when we abuse our bodies with lack of exercise, poor sleep, emotional stress, all this kind of stuff, we put damage on our mitochondria, and we tend to not live as long as others. And you can see, you're young, I'm older, just by living on the planet, you accumulate reactive oxygen species, and your skin changes, your organs change, and stuff moves in different ways. And eventually you run out of energy and die. But if you have exercise, you try to do what you do, you can live longer. But cancer is like accelerated aging because the mitochondria are no longer in control, and you're going to reach entropy a lot faster, accelerated entropy. So yeah, we can put all this together in a global physiological evolutionary biology context, and we can explain the majority of this. And it's interesting too when you do metabolic therapy, like we've seen for some cancer patients who also have diabetes, obesity, and all kinds of other health issues that they were all being treated with pills. As their cancer disappears, so does hypertension, diabetes, all these other things go away. It's along with the cancer. It's unbelievable.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's all related to mitochondrial health. That's all it is, mitochondrial health.
Exactly. Now, when it comes to metabolic therapies, some people assume that different types of cancers are fundamentally different diseases, and you touched on this a little bit earlier. Do you think the metabolic approach applies to, broadly across most cancers, or are there some exceptions to that?
We haven't found any exceptions. No. That's why we published that big paper. I had to spend a year going through the literature looking for evidence that mitochondria are damaged in all major cancers. So I don't know, maybe there is a cancer out there that has normal mitochondrial function, but we haven't found it yet. And every major cancer that we find has some abnormality in the mitochondria number, structure, or function, and they all accumulate lipid drops. And again, so that's why I say over and over again, cancer is one disease. All the tumors, regardless of where they come in the body, all accumulate lipid drops and have abnormalities in the number, structure, and function of mitochondria, can't burn lipids, and are dependent on glucose and glutamine. So some cancers are more dependent on glutamine than glucose, others are glucose and glutamine, but together. And then that's how we found metastatic cancer, which is a fusion hybridization between the immune cell and a cancer stem cell. Because the immune cells, in attempts to put out wounds, cancer has been recognized as an unhealed wound. So our immune system, macrophages and certain kinds of leukocytes come into the cancer environment, and they throw growth factors and cytokines to try to put out or heal the wound. But that should not be done in that context. And then they fuse with these cancer cells. Now, immune cells like macrophages are genetically programmed to enter and exit the bloodstream, can move through tissues and this kind of thing. So when they become corrupted, that is the origin of the metastatic cell. It's a corrupted macrophage. So we spent years trying to figure out what the origin of the metastatic cancer cell was, and we found out that it was a macrophage. It took us 10 years to figure that out. Because then we said, well, what about human? And then we went and looked at all major human cancers, and they all manufacture markers of macrophages. So then the first thing we asked, the Newscombs out of Oxford in England had been studying energy metabolism in macrophages for decades. And what they found is that glutamine is a predominant fuel for cells of our immune system and macrophages in general. So what happens is, like in burn cancer patients, when the skin gets burned, you open the body to staph and strep bacterial infections because the skin is a protector against bacteria. And when you have a burn patient, you give them high-dose glutamine. You give them high-dose glutamine because it jacks up the immune system to kill the bacteria that's coming in droves, because your skin is now... So the burn cancer patient, if their immune system is not jacked up, they're going to die from infections indirect from the burn. So what happens is you got to keep your immune system as powerful as possible, and they use glutamine like there's no tomorrow, and that glutamine is what the macrophage is using. But the same fuel is also driving the metastatic cancer cell, which is a macrophage. So that's why we developed the pulse therapeutic strategy for managing cancer, because we know that the tumor cell that's going to kill us and the immune cell that's going to save us are both using the same fuel. So you really have to be strategic now. So it's good. Glucose is a non-necessary nutrient, so you can push glucose levels really down really, really far. But you have to be strategic in how you target the glutamine, because if you're too aggressive, you might impair the immune system. You might not kill all the tumor cells, but you've blocked the very cells that you need to pick up the dead corpses. So again, it's a balance, and that's why the physician must know how to strategically apply glutamine targeting while the patient is in a state of nutritional ketosis, because that's the dosage. This is why I'm saying we have not yet perfected the system. We just need to improve dosage timing and scheduling with the various glutamine targeting drugs while the patient is in systemic nutritional ketosis. So we cut the glucose off, and now we strategically target the glutamine. But we want our immune system to be able to come in and pick up the dead corpses. Otherwise, we get internal infection. So again, it's knowing how to play the different systems of the biology of our systems against each other and off of each other.
How do you do that, with the glutamine, the press pulse method? Do you restrict glutamine for some period of time and then you introduce it again, or how does this work?
Yeah, that's it. So that's what we're trying to work out. Right? This is non-sexy science. People love the fun. It's true. Everybody wants, what's the molecular mechanism? What's the gene? I don't care. What I care about is how can we keep the individual, whether it's a mouse or a human, alive and a high quality of life for as long as possible. And we know that if we're too aggressive in targeting glutamine, we not only paralyze our immune system, we also damage our gut. The gut needs so much glutamine. So you do a job on the microbiome and you cause all kinds of other problems. So you really want to keep the whole systems of our biology working at optimal levels while slowly degrading this tumor. See, the system today is you got to burn and poison these people, get rid of the tumor as quickly as possible, but you're harming so many other systems in the body at the same time. We take a totally different approach to this. We gradually destroy the tumor, slowly and surely, while the rest of the body slowly and surely gets healthier and healthier. So it's not like, because when you've done standard of care to people, and you say, you're going to clean, we don't see any more scans, clean, but your body is so beat up. But then if the tumor comes back, your body is already so damaged from all the poison and radiation, you can't use your normal cells as effectively to kill the tumor cells. Because to kill cancer, you need not only the intervention that we're talking about, you need the health and vitality of the normal cells in the body that work against the tumor, because they can get by with using ketones and fatty acids where the tumor cells can't. So the brain and exercise becomes an extremely important tool, because the muscles will suck up the glucose out of the bloodstream. Where the tumors absolutely need it, the muscles will take it from the tumor. The brain will suck up what's little left. What's left for the tumor? Almost nothing. And then you come in with the glutamine targeting and polish off these things, but you do it strategically so you don't damage your gut or impair your immune system. So it's a beautiful system. It's so elegant. And I just get excited talking about it. It's just going to be so magnificent when it's used to perfection. We need people like you that will perfect this. You're the kind of people that will perfect all this. We're the ones providing the science for what you should do.
I find it so fascinating, Professor Seyfried. It's but one thing that's kind of that I'm thinking a lot about these days is that we're talking a lot about glucose and elevated blood glucose levels. In your opinion, are elevated blood glucose levels the biggest driver of cancer, or is it more nuanced than that?
Well, I think the elevated glucose levels will lead to systemic inflammations and things like this. We always have to go back to see how we evolved as a species. We're a species for about 1.5 million years, which is nothing compared to the previous history of life on Earth. But for several 100,000 years, we were hunter-gatherers. How high was our blood glucose levels trying to run down a buffalo or some sort of an animal, an elephant, and kill it? And then you eat it, and what are you eating? You're eating fat and meat. Where are you getting your glucose from? How can you have very high blood sugar levels? You're going to be super insulin sensitive. Where are your sugars coming from when you're eating meat and fat and you don't have pizza pies inside of an elephant. I mean, where are you getting your sugar from for hundreds of thousands of years? And you're exercising like crazy. So your blood sugar is always going to be in the 55 to 75, 80 milligram per deciliter, or 3 to 4 millimolar level. You're never going to be diabetic. Where the hell are you going to get diabetes from? Who's going to be unless you have a type 1. That could happen in Paleolithic times. But most of the time, cancer, hypertension, all these different diseases was unknown. How do you know? Because we have people on the planet today that live according to their traditional ways, and they don't have cancer, they don't have diabetes, they don't have obesity, they don't have high blood sugar levels. So consistently high blood sugar is an example of a metabolic inhomeostasis. You're not in metabolic homeostasis any longer. And you put your body at risk for damaging mitochondria. And the mitochondrial damage leads to these chronic diseases, whether it's diabetes, whether it's hypertension, whether it's cancer, whether it's cardiovascular disease, or dementia. This is another example of chronic disease, damage to mitochondria. So clearly, high blood sugar is the consequence of inactivity and consumption of highly processed carbohydrates, which is the global Western phenomenon that's striking the entire planet. And that's going to account for that. Our Paleolithic ancestors never had that situation. Now, did they want to be in that situation? The answer is no. They wanted sweets, but they couldn't get it because it wasn't available. Not that they didn't want it. We developed it. You have to realize that in the 1800s, sugar was in very limited supply, and people who had sugar often had to keep it in lock and key because it was such a desire. It was almost like a drug. It's like cocaine or something. Now we've mass-produced sugar. In almost every kind of a food we eat is riddled with sugar. And we're getting diabetes, and we're getting fat, and we're getting demented, and we're getting cancer. We're getting all that. That never happened in our Paleolithic ancestors. We're still Paleolithic man today, living in an environment that we've always wanted. But there's a Pandora's box in that environment called cancer, dementia, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. All of the chronic diseases are the Pandora's box that we have strived for in our entire existence as a species. And now it's coming back to give us all these problems. But if you know that, then you at least have the choice to manage it and be aware of it. And that's the individual thing.
Yeah. One thing that I'm thinking is, regarding healthy mitochondria or mitochondrial damage, we have indigenously living populations who have a high carbohydrate diet, eating mostly sweet potatoes, for example, that don't get cancer in the same degree as we do. So do you maybe believe that we can maintain mitochondrial health long term while still including healthy carbohydrate sources like fruit, honey, milk, sweet potatoes, stuff like that?
I think so.
Or must we be in ketosis to protect our mitochondria and inhibit cancer development?
Well, I think ketosis was how we are ketotic. We evolved to be in ketosis. And when you burn ketone bodies, you have to realize how powerful they are in keeping mitochondria healthy. Every breath of air we take in, we produce a certain amount of ATP. But if we're in ketosis, we get more efficient energy with each breath. The oxygen is much more efficient in producing the ATP when you're burning ketones. It's a very interesting bioenergetic efficiency. You get more ATP per mole of ketone than per mole of pyruvate from glucose. And fatty acids uncouple, so that dissipates some of the energy. So it's not nearly a ketone. They call it a super fuel for maintaining, not only reducing oxygen radicals in the mitochondria, which damage us over the time, but also the energy efficiency that we get. So clearly that state is healthy for our mitochondria. Can we do it by eating sweet potatoes and this kind of thing? Well, those are natural carbs. They're not what we call high glycemic carbohydrates. They're clearly not going to be as damaging to the mitochondria as, say, highly processed carbs. The other thing, too, is if you are active, if you have a lot of exercise, you can certainly mitigate some of the elevations of blood sugar. And again, how many sweet potato? I mean, what are you going to do? Gorge yourself on these things? It was a balance. When you think of how we evolved, it was, yes, we ate sweet potatoes, we ate tubers, but you had to boil them. You're not going to eat them raw. We ate. Listen, as a species, think about who we were. We ate everything. Anything that would swim, crawl, fly, we ate it. We never were. People who say I'm a vegan, that's a luxury of modern lifestyle. You were a vegan in the old days, you would have been extinct. You would never die. We could be dead. We try to track down an elephant when you've just been eating vegetables. It's not going to be. It's hard to kill those things, and the energy that would be expended, and even if the Inuits in the Arctic Circle eating walruses and seals and fish and all that stuff, they weren't eating vegetables in any quantity. Only seasonal stuff they would get it, and then they would store it in like fish oil and stuff. So you're always getting highly nutritious foods. So again, yes, there are some, but the people that we see living according to their traditional ways usually have some meat source in there. They're never without some sort of meat. I don't know any tribe that eats no meat, except modern day vegans, and they have to take vitamin supplements, otherwise they're going to have all kinds of imbalances. And why would anybody want to do that to their body anyway? I mean, you want to stay healthy, right? So
yeah, well, exactly. I can just speak for myself. I've done that, and it was out of pure, I thought this was what I was hearing that was healthy, and I tried it for several years, and I've never been as sick my entire life. So,
well, because that's the point. Why would anyone want to do that to themselves when you can eat a tomahawk ribeye? Talk to Anthony, Anthony Chafee, right? Him, Anthony. Oh yeah, he was there at the meeting. He eats massive amounts of tomahawk ribeyes every day.
Yeah.
And look at him. Did he look unhealthy to you? I don't think so.
Exactly. He's like, he's the statue of health, I would say.
Him and Dominic D'Agostino, both of those guys. Dom eats all that stuff too. And Anthony's wife looked pretty healthy too. She didn't look like she was a weak one.
I met her at the meeting in London, and they look very healthy, and I had a chat with her, and they're lovely, and it's like But,
I'm not saying just don't eat only meat. I think we can certainly have sweet, great yams, these kinds of things. But what we do, we take that sweet potato, and we put a lot of brown sugar on it, and some sweet sauces and all kinds of stuff to make it even better than it is. But that's usually for holidays and things. You don't do that every day, but it's just our desire for sugar and sweet. We evolved to be loving that, and now we have an abundance of it, and it's killing us. So, but I try to, listen. I eat pizza pie. I eat pastries and stuff, but I don't eat it every day.
Exactly.
But we enjoy things. That's what we like to do.
Yeah.
So.
And I like to say it's not so much about what we eat between Christmas and New Year's. It's about what we eat between New Year's and Christmas that matters. So.
That's true.
Yeah.
And have a lot of exercise. But I know today, in big cities, you're under a lot of stress. You're sitting in cars with traffic jams. You run home to children that are crying, yelling. They want something fast. You're not going to go out in the backyard, chop the head off a chicken, pluck it, and then have it for dinner. It's much easier to throw something in the microwave that's probably processed in some form, and it's hard. And then the kids today and young people today are on these cell phones, and they're getting all freaked out about what someone said about them on some chat room. And that puts a lot of emotional stress, which raises glucocorticoids in your body, which makes unnatural elevations of sugar. Poor sleep at night. You can go through the whole stress, emotional stress, and all this kind of stuff. And you put that together, and you got a lot of cancer, dementia, cardiovascular disease, obesity, diabetes, insulin insensitivity. You go right down the list. It's very clear what's going on. Mm-hmm. It's just our modern day society is putting us at risk for this. So, and there was a paper that just came out of ASCO, the big cancer pharmaceutical industry meetings, where a Canadian physician, how powerful it is for people. People believe in physicians, that whatever they say is like God's word. In most cases it is, but not in the cancer field. But the physician who wrote out prescriptions for the cancer patient, take the chemo, but every day you have to walk so many miles, you have to lift so much weights, you have to do this, to do that. And the other person getting the same chemo, but the doctor told him, just do exercise without it specifying. The patients that got the prescription from the doctor to run this much and walk this much and lift this much, they did much better. So clearly, if the patient follows the prescription that the physician gives them, they will do better. And adherence to any effective therapy will always produce a better outcome than not adherence. So if the doctors would know how to integrate present standards of care with exercise and nutrition, I think the outcomes for the cancer patients will be infinitely better. So the future is bright as far as I can see. It's definitely not abysmal like most people make it out to be. So we have the strategy, we know what to do, we know how to do it, we just got to get the field to recognize this and let them move forward with it. But again, the biggest block is revenue generation. And don't forget, the cancer field is revenue generation first, patient outcome second. And I know I say that, but it's true. We can't use our therapy right now in any way because it doesn't generate enough revenue for the system. And that's the truth. You want to know what the dark side is? You can't generate revenue from this. Therefore, it's not going to be widely accepted until an entrepreneur can figure out how this can be replacing revenue generation. Then once that happens, you're going to see it become widespread.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's one thing I've been thinking about a lot, because you've been dedicating decades to this work. How has the response from the scientific and medical communities evolved over time? Do you feel like the door is starting to open, or is there still strong resistance?
Well, I think the door is certainly starting to open. The word is getting out. You know, we were the first ones to bring this to the attention. I mean, Warburg had it for sure, but they threw him under the bus. When I published my book in 2012 on this, it started the kind of serious discussion. We had published several papers before that in scientific journals for the scientists based on preclinical studies and things like this. But again, there's a lot of discussion within the scientific community because they use oxygen consumption as a measure for oxidative phosphorylation, which then, and they still haven't come around to realize mitochondrial substrate level phosphorylation. So there's some resistance in the scientific community, and there always has to be, and I appreciate that. But as far as the industry is concerned, the hospitals and the pharmaceuticals and this kind, they have yet to recognize it as a legitimate approach, but their arguments against it are not scientific; they're systematic. I don't believe it unless there's a clinical trial. Well, that's not a scientific argument. We have a lot of case reports and small clinical groups and massive amounts of preclinical data to show that scientifically it's what you should be doing. Well, I don't believe it unless and that's a bullshit thing, because when I was working with the epilepsy people, they wouldn't believe ketogenic diet for managing epileptic seizures until you did a big trial. And then we did a big trial, my colleagues, not me, my colleagues did a big trial proving unambiguously that ketogenic diet is a powerful therapy for managing seizures in children, epilepsy. So we had the evidence, but the pharmaceutical companies in the field refused. They still want drugs first, and then if the drugs don't work, we can do that. But so that's argument, do a clinical. No, it's not. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with revenue generation. Show me how I can make money on ketogenic metabolic therapy, and I'll do that. When I can't replace my money from radiation and chemo, I'm not going to do that. So clearly, it's revenue generation. So do the cancer patients know that? Do the cancer patients know that their disease is driving a major industry, and that if they have an alternative? Why the physicians aren't saying we have an alternative? You can't believe how many physicians are emailing me when they have cancer. They want to do metabolic therapy. They don't want to do radiation and chemo. So the physicians who support me the most are those that are retired. Not the ones that are actively practicing. The ones that are retired are telling me, "Oh God, I know you're right. I've known this. I just couldn't say anything about it." They retire. Yeah. So that's what you're up against. You're up against the system. And I'm telling you, once you get these young physicians involved, like our new society, Society for Metabolic Oncology, you should be a member of that yourself. It's an international society from all physicians, nutritionists, physicians, scientists around the world, all major countries, wanting to jump on this bandwagon to improve outcome, because those who are doing it are starting to see dramatic success. But they fear losing their license because they're doing it. That's why. They can't abandon standards of care for fear of losing their license, but the IRBs, institutional review boards, say you must do standard of care first, and if it doesn't work, then you can consider metabolic therapy. No. You do metabolic therapy first, and if it doesn't work, then you can do standard of care. No, we can't do that because we're going to lose too much money. Suppose metabolic therapy works and we don't have to use drugs and radiation. My God, we're going to lose so much money.
This is what irritates me. It infuriates me that, I understand this financial incentive, but how about, by keeping people alive and healthy, they can contribute to the economy of their society and their country by staying on the market and in working. The big picture. Why can't we just look at this from a financially big picture? And it irritates me.
Well, yeah, but that's the purest of you. It's more profitable to keep people sick than healthy.
Yeah, sadly.
And it's not like we're forcing people to be sick. But the food industry is making it so attractive to be sick. And the pharmaceutical industries and food industries collaborate in different ways. So you get sick eating bad food, and they come in with the pills and the medications to try to make you healthy. So it's extremely profitable societies here. And it drives economies, too. Your people are making bigger money, they get bigger taxes, and you can buy all kinds of stuff. And what are you telling me? Oh, don't eat the Twinkie? I love Twinkies, the guy says. What are you telling me? Yeah, well, the Twinkie, you eat enough of them, it'll kill you. It's like poison.
Yeah.
I'm not proposing to anybody that they should or should not eat whatever they want to eat. All I'm doing is showing you the science. I'll let everybody come to their own. That's why we developed the glucose ketone index calculator, which is this a quantitative tool to allow every person to know at any moment of the day what stage of health their body is in by looking at the ratio of glucose to ketones. So, if you're insulin insensitive and your blood sugar is high and you've got a lot of inflammation, your GKI is going to be very high. If you are a Paleolithic man like Anthony and Dominic D'Agostino, you're going to be in the low zones where GKIs are going to be 2.0 or below. And that's where the zone you want to kill cancer cells in. Cancer cells can't survive or have a difficult time surviving in those low zones. But the person can make a decision for themselves. And we're going to work on making that a standard. Once you have continuous glucose monitors, continuous ketone monitors, we're going to be able to know at any moment of our daily life how you stand with respect to metabolic homeostasis. And then let every person on the planet make their own decision as to what state of metabolic homeostasis they would like to be in. But it's no longer going to be guesswork. You have a quantitative tool to tell you where you're going to be. No longer guesswork. Oh, I've been on a ketogenic diet for a long time. I don't feel that good. What's your GKI? Well, it's still pretty high. Well, you're not doing it right. You got to know what to do and how to do it. The physician and the patient will work together as a team. And a lot of this can be done through Zooms or computers. AI can help. All of this stuff will help. But it's the individual that will be totally responsible for their destiny with the help of a physician. And I think right now we're at the very, very beginning of this transition to knowing what to do and how to do it. And I think we'll worry about unanticipated consequences once we get the people back into a state of health, and then see what happens. And of course, there's always something you never anticipated happening. But right now, I think that the world is suffering from chronic disease, all kinds of chronic diseases. Their metabolic homeostasis is not adjusted appropriately. They're in metabolic inhomeostasis. So why don't we correct that and then worry about other things later? So what we have today is so many physicians, at least top academic scientists, are so interested in molecular mechanisms of action. I say let's manage the problem first and then worry about the molecular mechanisms of action. Why are we studying mechanisms for something that's not linked to a phenomenon? Why are we letting all these poor cancer patients die a miserable death when you're trying to figure out a molecular mechanism of action that may not be linked directly to the phenomenon that you're working with? Let's manage the phenomenon first and then figure out the minutia of it, rather than doing the minutia that may not be linked to the problem that you're trying to study. So all of it has to be done in the right order to get the best outcome. And that's what we're trying to tell people. And the patients themselves must be educated. You must have some level of scientific literacy. Both the physicians and the patients must become scientifically literate. For a physician to say to a patient that glucose has no impact on cancer, eat whatever you want, don't worry about it, this is misinformation. That person does not know the information about the problem that they're treating. That should not happen. Why did that happen? Because in medical schools, these people were never trained to know what we're talking about. And they then do advanced training, the internship, and they never study. They just learn the dosage of what toxic drug they're supposed to give, not knowing that toxic drug could work 10 times better if the patient is in nutritional ketosis. So that all has to be worked out. So there's a lot of levels at which we have to address, a lot of issues that we have to address before what I'm talking about becomes mainstream. It will become it's just a matter of time. You will see it mainstream. I don't know if I'll live long enough to see it mainstream, but you certainly.
I hope I will live to. I hope it will happen very soon, and that it will, happen in my time. I really hope.
Well, if it doesn't happen in your time, then it ain't going to happen. I'm counting on you.
Yeah. Right? We'll continue.
You're going to carry the burden for me.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, I tell my students, if they don't if they don't push this thing forward, and when it doesn't happen, I'll come back from the grave and I will haunt them.
Yeah, that's a good way to thread. It's a good one. But can I ask you, Thomas, regarding the food industry, what is your view on dietary seed oils and the long-standing recommendation to avoid saturated fats in favor of unsaturated fats from vegetable oils? Could this have contributed to our current metabolic disease landscape, or?
Well, it might be another provocative agent thrown in to damage mitochondria. Don't forget, saturated fats are what the liver uses to make ketone bodies. So we mobilize fat out of our adipocytes when we don't eat, and they go into the bloodstream. You can see the blood. We did it. That goes up in saturated fatty triglycerides, and they go into the liver and get broken down into water-soluble ketone bodies. We give MCT oil as a kicker during water-only fasting or this, you can do some MCT oil, which jacks up your ketones a little bit more. So polyunsaturated fatty acids are fish oils, omega-3 fatty acids, extremely healthy for you. Omega-6, less healthy. So again, it's the ratio of these and the amount that you take into your body. So everything has to be adjusted accordingly to natural ways. No, I don't think an oversaturation of anything that would be provocative to creating a disruption in metabolic homeostasis should be seriously avoided. But I don't think avoiding. Maybe some seed oils would certainly be damaging to the mitochondria. You would want to avoid that. Cook things in butter, for crying out loud. Everything in butter tastes better.
It really does. Much
Why would
better
you want to cook something?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. But what's your perspective on the common belief that meat causes cancer? There are some theories that certain compounds formed when cooking meat may be carcinogenic. How do you interpret this? Have you looked into this?
I don't see any. Why would that? Well, look at Dominic and Anthony. They don't look like they're so unhealthy. That's all they eat is meat. I don't know what's going on with those guys. Why would it be so? These guys look like Adonises, for Christ. They look like David in down in the Rome statue there. So I don't know what kind of meat those guys are eating. But I have to agree with you, but in some ways, because a lot of the meats can be hormonally jacked. You give these cows all kinds of hormones and stuff, but naturally, listen. Plains Indians here in the country, they ate buffalo every day. I mean, we exterminated woolly mammoths. We ate so many of them. So I don't see any harm in eating meat if it's more natural, grass-fed, natural stuff. Maybe some hormonally prepared hamburgers. I don't know, but meat is any food that's natural should not be avoided. I don't know where the health problems come in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But can I ask you one question? How do we explain cancer in young children who seemingly haven't had the time to accumulate the metabolic damage that we associate with cancer? Could it be linked to in utero exposures or early life metabolic insults? Why do young 2-3-year-olds get cancer?
Well, they get cancer for the same reason that the rest of us get cancer. They have mitochondrial disruption. Mitochondria, every childhood tumor we look at, they're fermenting. So how did that happen? Obviously, there was some damage to the mitochondria in a population of cells during the development. I mean, some kids have cancer before they're born. There's prenatal kinds of cancers. Then it becomes more prominent when they're born. So neonatal cancers, all these cancers, they're all fermenters. How did it happen? Was it a hormonal imbalance during the developmental period? We have microplastics and forever chemicals pouring into our systems from all different sources that could get through the blood placental barrier. We have anastomoses of blood vessels that cause interrupted oxygenation of certain tissues. But whatever it is, when you see the childhood tumor, they're fermenters, which means they have a common origin to cancer in adults. It's just that we don't know the sequence of provocative events that may have initiated that. So again, in those particular situations, we just have to know how to manage the cancer once the tumor is identified, and which is tragic because I see so many little kids with brain tumors being brutalized, surgically hacked apart and radiated and poisoned, and even if they survive, they're brain damaged in many cases. Why are we doing that to these little kids when we can give them metabolic therapy and we have the parasite medications which target the mitochondrial substrate level phosphorylation. We have everything that we need to keep these kids alive for a longer. We're not using it. We're simply not using the tools that we have. So I don't know how we're going to prevent childhood cancer because we know it's something that would provoke mitochondrial damage, but what is it? Is it something that the woman themselves, is she obese? Is she abusing her body in some way that it now translates into the child? Is it a healthy, very healthy woman who just happened to have exposure to forever chemical in some food that she didn't know about? I don't know, but all I know is that the initiation is the same. It causes mitochondrial damage followed by compensatory substrate level phosphorylation. So therefore, our strategy should be in the management zone rather than the prevention zone. When you're an adult and you know what can cause cancer, you have the choice to prevent it. But in utero or a child doesn't have that choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's the thing. We're seeing now younger, seemingly healthy individuals develop cancer at an increasing rate. What is driving this trend, in your opinion? Is it?
Well, I don't know how healthy they are. If they were really healthy, they wouldn't be getting cancer in the first place. I mean, we have an worldwide obesity epidemic. We have more and more highly processed carbs entering our diet everywhere. Food has become globalized. Used to be people would just grow what they had in the backyard and eat it. It was quite healthy. Now you're getting something in a package, you don't know where the hell it came from. The fresh fruits can live on as I said, they can look good for weeks. What are they talking about? Something that's really, really nutritious should be bad in about 2 days on the shelf. You eat it as soon as it's ripe and fresh. So we have engineered a lot of our foods to survive longer, but at the same time, we're reducing nutritional value of those foods. So again, all of these things are impacting, and I think it's the globalization of our societies that are putting us at risk for earlier and earlier chronic diseases, not just cancer. You can look at type 2 diabetes is becoming more and more prevalent in younger folks. Hypertension, all kinds of chronic problems. So cancer is just one of the chronic problems that people see. Oh, why are these young people getting so much cancer? I can't tell you how many people in their 20s, early 30s, 40s, emailing me. Oh, I've got this cancer, I got that cancer. What am I supposed to do? And I'm saying, what the hell is going on with all these things? What are you people doing out there? You got to get a lot of exercise. You got to start realizing, keep your mitochondria healthy. If your mitochondria are healthy, it's going to be very hard to get cancer. You must have done something to damage your mitochondria. Well, I run every day and I do this and I do that, but you might be under a lot of stress. Maybe you can't sleep at night. Maybe you have there's a constellation of factors. It's not one factor. It's usually a constellation of factors that come together. You have to know those factors and address them. Okay, they are on the Pelotrons all day long, but then they're sitting in front of a computer all day, and you don't know. This is not who we were as a species. This is not hunting down an elk, spending all day long trying to kill and cut this thing up. Most of our life was doing that. It wasn't sitting in front of computers or being exposed to forever chemicals, stress, and all this other kind of stuff that we have in modern society.
Yeah. What would need to happen for the cancer community to truly reconsider its foundations, do you think?
Well, I think when you have enough cancer patients that are alive, that should be dead. I love the guys that are told, I got 1 month to live, what am I going to do? And here they are 4 and 5 years out. Why are you still here? You were supposed to have a terminal cancer. Why are you not dead? And some people live with their tumors, like Pablo Kelly. He lived 10 years with a glioblastoma, only to die from the fourth surgical debulking, a cerebral hemorrhage that came as the result of the surgery, but not from the cancer. But was he cured? No. But he lived many, many years longer than he was predicted to live. We're still perfecting the system. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with keeping people alive longer with a higher quality of life, overall increased survival? What's wrong with that? Everybody says, you have to have the cure. Listen, who can guarantee a cure on anything? The issue here is, how long can you live with something that was supposed to kill you and you're still alive? And if you can live 5 or 6 times longer, then that's success. I don't know if metabolic therapy can cure. The only thing we definitely cured was a dog that had a terminal mast cell tumor, and that we published it in a paper. The woman took the dog and took him off all the processed food and put him on raw chicken and raw fish and oil and raw eggs and cut the calories down. The dog died from old age. The cancer disappeared very quickly, and the dog died of old age. So cancer never came back. But the veterinary community said, oh, we can never do that because you're not supposed to feed dogs raw meat. And I'm saying, what the hell? The dog evolved from a wolf. What do you think? The wolves were not eating raw chickens and eggs and stuff like that? What the hell were they eating? Kibbles and bits? You know, they're not eating processed dog food. Where are they going to? A wolf is going to go to the supermarket and say, I can only eat a processed dog. I can't eat a chicken or a rat or a mouse. I mean, the absurdity of what we do as a species, it's just nuts. So, and then it turned out that the vets and the dog food industries got in together, and the dog food industry said, we'll support it. It's all revenue generation.
Yeah.
You know? So anyway, it's all, when you put it all down, we put ourselves in this hole, and we can dig ourselves out of it by knowing what to do and how to do it. And it may be uncomfortable for some people to know that, but I don't care anymore. You know, so.
Yeah. But can I ask you, regarding metabolic therapy, are you currently working with or collaborating with oncologists and working on clinical applications of metabolic therapy for cancer patients today? Yeah,
well, that's our big paper that came out with the protocol treatment that Dr. Duraj, he was at the other meeting in Switzerland, and they're going to start up in clinics. There are folks that are going to start implementing what we have said, and the protocols and the treatments. But why are they not doing it? But you're not going to get, you only get it at these new small clinics. You're not getting it at the top hospitals. No one is doing metabolic therapy at the top hospitals because it's too disruptive. The revenue stream. Can you imagine if MD Anderson or Sloan Kettering, top medical schools, would start doing metabolic therapy and the outcome of their patients would be massively better than what they're doing currently? Everybody would want that, right? But they don't. Yeah. They can't do that. It's too disruptive to the current technology. So, but it'll come because patients want to live, and that's going to be the pressure. It has to come from both the scientific side and the treatment side, the clinical side and the scientific side, both coming together for this common goal. And entrepreneurs and you saw the guy, the insurance guy at the meeting there saying, "Oh, we're trying to do it better." They won't. Are you kidding me? You think they're going to start giving these guys continuous glucose monitors so they can bring their sugars down? Insurance policies have to be rewritten. They don't want to lose any money either. They're all part of the same problem. Everybody's backslapping and making a hell of a lot of money on this cancer stuff, but nobody really wants to do anything about it. But we certainly can, and you can, and your clinics can. But you got to be careful, though. They come after you and say, "Oh, you're practicing medicine the way it's not supposed to be," and then you got to run into all these legalistic kinds of things. So, but I'm not part of their club, so I really don't worry about that. You guys have to worry about it more than me. My job is just prove the science, and somebody please prove me wrong. So I come asking people, show me where I made this great mistake. How is it possible that I was misled by Otto Warburg, a giant? How did he mislead me? How did my preclinical studies mislead me? What experiment, what control group did I miss that I didn't include? Why are these guys that do what we say live longer than the ones who don't do what we say? So I don't know, maybe where are we making this great mistake? I haven't found it yet. Please, somebody tell me where I made this mistake. I can't find it. So this is what we're up against right now.
What are you working on right now, Thomas? Are there new studies or projects that you are especially excited about, or?
Yeah, we're working big time right as we're talking. Right next door behind me here, we've got big projects on breast cancer, pancreatic cancer, chronic disease, managing chronic diseases. So we're looking at mitochondrial function. We're doing all the things preclinically that we need to do, and at basic science levels, interrogating cancer cells. We're trying to find the cancer cell that can survive on fatty acids and ketone bodies. Yeah. We can't find it. We're banging our heads against. We're so disappointed and depressed that we can't find a tumor cell that can live on fatty acids. So I can't find it. So we just have to keep doing what we're doing and just overwhelmed with the evidence. And then eventually somebody will say, yeah, those guys were right, actually. So, and yes, we are right. It just takes a time for the people. It's so disruptive right now, especially when you hear what I say, and then they go running down to their physicians. Oh, I just heard the most incredible thing. Can you give me metabolic therapy? Oh, no, there's no evidence to support. Never heard of it.
Yeah.
So, and the poor patient gets out and she's so depressed. I've had people tell me, I shouldn't say what I'm saying because I'm giving false hope to people. And I'm saying, what do you mean giving false hope? You go to the physician, he's telling you need radiation and chemo. That's false hope. You know, that's because they don't usually tell patients this stuff is palliative. We're giving you palliative. You know, a lot of times they're not saying we can cure you. We're just giving you. What does that mean? Keeping you alive a little bit longer in a miserable state of existence? No. You have to. This has to be a transitional knowledge. You have to become scientifically literate and aware of what you're doing, and this. So it's going to happen in many fronts, not one front. It's a whole transition of thinking about medicine and knowing that it's the mitochondria. Nobody ever talked about that. What are you talking about, mitochondria? You don't even know what a mitochondria is. Most people don't even know what the hell a mitochondria is. What is a mitochondria? Yeah. Can I buy it? Can I get a mitochondria on Amazon? Can I send away for it? Right? You know, Amazon's selling mitochondria now. That's the absurdity of it, right? So people have to be scientifically literate and have to know how their bodies work and what makes it healthy and what doesn't. And we're pointing that out and giving you quantitative tools to know that. Oh, that's a breakthrough. So, we're excited about that. And we got a lot of 8 cancers, and we're just going through the list of cancers, showing if we can find any that can survive without glucose and glutamine, and we can't. So we know it's all the same disease, and that word just has to keep getting out, because the questions you ask me are the questions everybody asks me. What are the questions like, we've kept this guy alive for 12 or 14 years and he should have been dead in 6 months. What do you think the next step should be to keep him going? How do you think we should make an adjustment? Yeah, well, those are the kinds of questions that I'd love to have. Because what do you mean? The guy should have been dead 8-10 years ago. What the hell is he doing still alive? Why is he still alive? What did you do? And the doctors always say, that when I get all these emails back from people I haven't heard from for years, and I thought they were dead, they come back and I'm still alive. And the doctors say, wow, this is really interesting. Just keep doing what you're doing. I don't really not want to know what you did, but just keep doing what you're doing. What do you know what you're doing? You should know exactly what he did and why he did that. But they don't want to know. I say, how could you be so resistant to knowledge? I don't know. But I laugh because the doctors are always miffed. Oh, we haven't seen anything like this before. Oh, this is really interesting. Well, you'd get this every time if you did the same thing, you know. But I don't know. You tell me how long it's going to take. What do you think? What do you think about all this, Ragnar? What's your view? You're in the system.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, because I feel like it's a little bit difficult talking about this with my colleagues because of what you said. You know, you're being monitored. So I kind of talk with people who are not healthcare educated, like my husband, who's a pilot. He's the one who introduces me to all of these new ideas of thinking for the past 10 years. So, yeah, I don't know. I hope it will, I think social media, podcasts, etc. will, is a great way to kind of speed this a little bit up. So I'm hopeful that a lot of change will happen in my lifetime. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, JJ Turcan, he's a pilot for Air France. He just recently retired. I don't know if you know JJ. Your husband should know who he is.
My husband
he
probably.
Wrote a book. He wrote a book, Flying High, on how he used metabolic therapy. He had terminal kidney cancer, and he flew the big jumbo jets for Air France. And he had a meeting in the big cancer center in Paris about metabolic therapy. So he saved himself, and he's still doing well. He came, and his story, these stories that he are horrific, called Flying High by J.J. Turcan, who had advanced kidney cancer. He was a pilot for Air France for many, many years, but he's just retired. But he was the first pilot to get his license back after being diagnosed with terminal cancer.
Oh, yeah,
Apparently,
I've heard of him.
Yeah, Jay's a friend of mine. Nice French guy. Yeah. So he used our metabolic therapy.
Oh my God! Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So these guys. So there's a lot of people out there that are doing that can do much better than they are. I'm telling you, it's a movement. It's happening. It's a big movement.
Yeah.
So if you email me, and I'll give you the address to our society.
Yeah, I will.
Because Janak Nathan at Mumbai, India, is the secretary. He's an MD who's been working in ketogenic diet therapy for epilepsy, now switching to cancer, or doing both actually. So he's very skilled and knowledgeable. But he's the secretary of this society. The problem, the society doesn't have a very rich philanthropist to say, okay, usually the federal government, or drug company will come in and say, let me give you all this money to start this new society to push our drugs or something. Well, we're not pushing anything except metabolic health.
Yeah.
So it's hard to get the kind of kickoff money you need to have this kind of thing. So, but in any event, listen, I'll let you go. I got to run. I have a meeting.
Yeah. And I see my kids are coming home. But before we wrap up, one big question: do you believe? I think everyone, all listeners are thinking this right now. Do you believe that it's necessary to adhere to a ketogenic diet throughout your whole life if you want to avoid getting serious diseases like cancer, or can you do it as like a management tool?
Well, that's why we're developing this new ketogenic GKI strategy that will allow you to be in different zones. So if you want to get into the dark green zone to manage a disease, or to go get a super healthy for a while, that's fine. But you can go into the yellow zones, the orange zones. These are different zones of health. And how long you want to stay in a zone is up to you. But all we know is the dark red zone, where GKI is above 50, is not healthy. But you'd know that, and then you can make your own decision. So again, you have the choice to go in and out of these health zones based on the information you get from the glucose ketone index, which comes now from blood ketone sticks and glucose sticks, or you're going to have the continuous glucose ketone monitors that you'll see on your cell phone. So this will all be, the answer to your question is it's happening. It's going to come right down. So you don't have to be, it's your choice as to how long you want to be in these zones. So, and then you'll know, because right now there's no way to know any of this. It's all speculation and guesswork. But we'll make that quantitative, more regimented.
Yeah. Well, Thomas Seyfried, thank you so much for your time. I will put all your links, the links to your books, everything, all your information on my podcast show notes,
and
so people can find you.
Yeah, we're all supported by philanthropy and private foundations. So it's the private foundations and philanthropy that keep us going, and more and more folks are starting to donate money to us, because there's some people out there that just want to be part of the movement. They don't really need to make a profit. They just want to say we were helping this thing along. So we have societies and things that give us the money, and that keeps us. Let me hire all and do all this research next door. So I'll give you those links as well. I don't know if you might have them. So,
I might have them. I'll send you an email if I don't.
Okay, and I'll send you the link to our Janak Nathan. Get a hold of Janak. He'll be happy to talk to you more.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Okay. All right, Ragna. Very nice speaking with you. Have a nice day now. Bye.
You too, Thomas. Bye-bye. Thanks for tuning into this episode. If you're looking for more information or want to check out any studies I reference, head on to my website, babyletsmove.com. You can also join me for a workout through my app called Baby Let's Move, available in both App Store and Google Play. And don't forget to connect with me on Instagram and YouTube for even more content. If you enjoyed today's show, please consider giving it a 5-star rating or a like and share it with a friend. It really helps me reach more amazing listeners like you. Until next time, keep moving and stay healthy.